Hi, everyone, and welcome to the special Tramelcast of the Neil Haley Show, the Storehouse Media Group podcast, and also Jesus and Ugly Jody with our host, Jody Corbet. Jody, you have a topic for us today.
I do, my friend. Good to see you as always.
Good to see you.
Yes, today I wanted to talk about a concept that we learned. It's called center of gravity. Um, and so I'd like to chat a little bit about that if you're open for it.
I'm ready.
So center of gravity, it's actually a term in physics and engineering where the concept is there's a point in every object where it's essentially like if you were to balance a pen or a pencil on your finger. Well, that point where that pen is resting on your finger or whatever the thing is laying on, where it's balanced, that is considered the center of gravity. That's where it's in perfect balance with everything. Yeah, Carl von Clausewitz, one of the great strategists, he took that and applied it to the art of war, essentially. So he studied center of gravity, and he said, "Hey, there's something within your adversary that if you were to remove it, if you were to take it out, it would throw them off balance." Um, and you can take that a step further. If you were to remove it, it'd be like removing their heart, it'd be removing their will, the thing that kind of drives them, their engine, their motor, that we may use those terms these days. um, Center of gravity is a very interesting topic because if you take that concept and you move it across, obviously from a military perspective, anybody who attended the National War College is probably having nightmares right now of Carl von Clausewitz and some of the different things that they had to learn that in his concepts and strategies. But with center of gravity, the important thing to remember is not only does your adversary have a center of gravity, but your organization, your army, whatever it may be, has a center of gravity. And this can be applied at both the international, national, organizational, and individual level. So that means each person has a center of gravity. There's something inside of us. There's something that kind of we're focused, we're driven towards, whether you call it your purpose or whatever that that may be a personal decision you'd make, but there's a reason for it. Organizations with center of gravity, why does that organization exist? What is the purpose for having that organization? And so when you start studying this, it's pretty fascinating when you look at center of gravity across different domains. Um, Sound good so far?
Yeah, I'm interested in this. This is it's just so finding that center of gravity. Let's give an example of one business with a center
Well,
of gravity.
let's talk about this. Typically, and what Clausewitz says is once whoever determines their adversary's center of gravity and can remove it will win the war or win the battle.
Mhm.
Because again, he was a military strategist. So let's look at it in a military context. If you were to look at, let's say, for instance, our Revolutionary War here in the United States of
Mhm.
America, um, the British strategy was to basically subjugate the American colonists. So they viewed it as they had done other military campaigns, which is basically you move from city to city, you conquer the city, you destroy any military in that city, you occupy that city, and over time you just basically people will assimilate to what you want them to do because you have total control of the city, and you work your way up the coast until all the cities have been conquered. So that was kind of the British strategy or their center of gravity, what they envisioned as doing in order to complete or get them to the objective they wanted. Washington's strategy was very different, and it wasn't typical of a military leader at that day and age. Washington realized I'm facing the largest military on the earth with one of the best navies. They're the best equipped, best trained, and I have militia essentially. He did have some regulars or former regulars who had joined him, but most of his combat force was militia. So he knew he couldn't go toe to toe with them directly. So what Washington's strategy was, and I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, was, "Hey guys, let's just don't lose." Well, that's a different strategy because if you're gonna just if your strategy is don't lose and you pick the time and the place of the battle, well, that gives you a lot more flexibility. Um, and you don't really have to have a big army. So with the British strategy, what do you need? Well, you got to have money because you got to pay the army, you have to pay the soldiers, you have to pay the sailors, you have to pay for the equipment, the rifles and the ships and the cannon and the powder. So you have to pay. So there's a lot of money, there's a lot of people involved, there's a lot of logistics involved. How do you feed them? How do you care for the horses? All those things. And it takes time because you have to work your way up and conquer each of these different cities. So the British strategy was very, very cost inducive. You look at Washington's strategy, and it's basically, hey, we pick and choose the time and when we're going to fight. Um, if we don't think we can win, we don't take the battlefield. We walk away. His requires a lot less in resources, a lot less money, a lot less people, a lot less weapons. However, it will take a lot longer period than just going in and overtaking a city or a town and dominating that city or town into submission. So Washington's strategy actually will take a longer time period, but it requires a lot less resources. So his center of gravity was much different. Well, if you look at what happened, and for Washington, the big thing, the one thing he needs is time. So the longer he can drag out the conflict, and at least just have an army on the field to keep the British there and engaged, the more likely it is his strategy is going to play out and win. Um, and so that's obviously that's you can see that. You can go to the American Civil War, same situation. Okay, well, what is the center of gravity for the North, for the Union? Um, Abraham Lincoln got it dead on. Abraham Lincoln said, "We have got to stay unified as a country. Us remaining as the United States of America is the important piece." Now, clearly, there were other massive mitigating factors. You look at the topic of slavery, you look at the topic of states' rights, you look at the topic of agricultural, because obviously the northern states were more industrial and the southern states were more agricultural. Lincoln viewed it though as we need all of the states together to remain and not be a house divided, as we talk about in the book of Proverbs. Um, so his center of gravity, as he was looking at it, was, hey, we have to be able to protect the Union. The South, the Confederates' center of gravity, ended up becoming Robert E. Lee. Why do you think I might say Robert E. Lee specifically?
Because they defeated Lee. He was the one that was the cornerstone in the South. With him being defeated, you can win.
Correct. And so if you look at what happened, so Abraham Lincoln went through multiple generals at the beginning of the war because none of them could figure out what the center of gravity of the Confederates were. Then comes along Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant basically says, "Listen, wherever Lee goes, I go." And he realized he had more troops, he had more horses, he had more guns, he had more powder, he had more food than Lee had. And he basically was just going to dog Lee until Lee had nothing left. And what had happened up to that point was Lee would go, he'd win a battle, the Union general would be defeated and heartbroken or whatever, and really not pursue anymore. Well, that would buy Lee enough time to go back and restock his army, to get more soldiers, to get more horses, to get more cannons. Um, and so when you look at like massive, I would say defeat, a lot of historians will say it was kind of a tie at battles like Antietam. Um, but Lee lost a lot. The Confederate army was devastated. Um, and if they'd have just pushed, if McClellan had pushed the attack at Antietam, that would have ended the war. That would have been it. But Lee was able to retreat back, and every Union general that Abe Lincoln had always took their time to wait and to restock, and it gave Lee the ability to do the same thing, and then they just went back at it again. Grant was different. Grant said, "Wherever Lee goes, I go," and he ran him. Even when Grant lost battles, like at the Wilderness, instead of turning and going north, he turned and went south. And he said, "Guys, we're not done yet. We're going to keep pushing this. I know we lost this battle, but we're going to keep moving forward." And what it shows is Grant got the center of gravity for the Confederate Army, which was Robert E. Lee and the Army of Northern Virginia. And we can say that now with certainty because if you ask most people when the Civil War of the United States ended, they'll say April 15th, because that was the day that Lincoln or that Lee surrendered at Appomattox to Grant and his forces. But that wasn't really when the war ended. The war didn't end until May, because even when Lee surrendered, there were still two or three Confederate armies out in the field, in the Western Theater and even in the Eastern Theater, that were out there. But everybody knew that once Lee surrendered, the war was over. And so there you see again another example of, the South wasn't really attacking the North center of gravity,
Mm.
but the North got the South center of gravity. So and when you see those types of things and you can understand it, even advance to modern day, right, time or closer to modern day times, when you look at like the Vietnam conflict, the Vietnam War, um, the American center of gravity, what the reason we were fighting that war was to prevent the spread of communism. Um, but the Vietnamese, they were fighting that war because they viewed us as an aggressor. After, Vietnam had been split in two, um, they said, "Hey, wait a second. This isn't, this is our country. We're not going to allow you guys to split us in two." Um, but again, you wouldn't have known that until years later when McNamara goes back and sits down with his Vietnamese counterpart, and they start having these conversations of, well, what were you fighting for? Well, the Vietnamese are viewing us as these, people coming in to build an empire, to colonize them. And of course, McNamara's like, that was never our intention. We were never going to come here to colonize you. Well, you look at the Vietnamese history. That's all they'd ever, every indication they'd had from the West was somebody coming in, whether it was the French early on, and they fought against the French. They fought against the Japanese before that in World War II when the Japanese came in and took them over. They fought against the Chinese before that when the Chinese would come in and try and take them over. The Vietnamese always basically said, hey, listen, we just want our own country. We don't want to be taken over by anybody. We want to be left alone and let us live our lives in our country. Um, and we missed that. And they got our center of gravity. They knew that if they could just continue the war, that eventually the Americans would get tired and wore out and we'd go home. Um, and obviously, as you can see, that they got our center of gravity and everyone was, any historian will tell you, they won that conflict. So why do I say all that? It's important for us, whether it's in business, in sports, in the military, in any organization that we're in, to sit down and determine what is our center of gravity, because it's very important that we protect that. One of the things I always like process through with people is even as an individual, you can do that, right? You ever heard the saying, "Hell hath no fury as a woman scorned"?
Yes.
So I thought about that and I was like, the women in my life are some of the nicest, sweetest, wonderful people in the world. How could you see them as having hell hath no fury, right? Um, I believe, and this may be a little bit of a dangerous statement because once you understand someone's center of gravity, it's easy for you to attack it, but it's also important for us to defend it as well. So for me, as I've thought about this, I think about women and I'm like, for the majority of women, I believe their center of gravity is their capacity to love. They have such a deep capacity for love. And you see that in childbirth. I remember, when my son was born, or and anybody who's been a dad that's watched their wife giving birth to their child. If a guy went through childbirth and the nurse brought over the baby to the guy, but get that thing away from me. I am in so much pain right now. I am in so much hurt. This was a horrible experience. Um, but what's the first thing a mom does? She wraps that kid up in her arms and she loves that little baby, as it's part of her. And I think that capacity for love is so powerful. It's so magnificent, um, that it really gets down to the core of how God created women to be. Um, it enables them to love their children through difficult situations and challenging situations. But when that love is betrayed, when that love is when you're not loyal to that love that's being given to you back, that's where you can face that hell hath no fury kind of rage when you don't protect it. And so, I share that to say we can think of these things from an organizational or a business perspective, but we also need to be thinking of them from a personal aspect. Some of the relationships that are maybe around you that you have, maybe there's some challenges going on. Ask yourself, well, what is this person's center of gravity? What is it that they're trying to do that I may not be recognizing right off the bat? And can I come in alignment with them on that? Is there something I can do to help them? Is there something I can do to create a win-win? We talked about that in an earlier thing. My
Hmm.
my objective is always to create a win-win-win, a win for my client, a win for the customer, and a win for my company. And it may not look like the best win every time, but a win is better than nothing. And so when we talk about center of gravity, it really does vary. I know we talked about it like for the FBI, for instance, when I worked there. What's the center of the gravity for the FBI? My belief personally is the center of gravity for the FBI is the trust of the American people. We have to have a community that believes in what we're doing and believes that we are there to do the right thing, no matter what your political affiliation is, no matter what your, ethnicity is, your sexual orientation, any of the thing, your gender, whatever it is, none of that stuff matters. We are there to do the right thing, and to protect people. Well, if you know that that's the center of gravity, and you look at what's going on right now in our media, right? They're attacking the trust of the American people in the FBI. They're bringing up they're sowing seeds of doubt. They're talking about, and whether it's the left or the right politically, as you know, I don't care about politics. Um, but whether it's the left or the right, it's irrelevant. Whether it was, hey, Biden did this or Trump's doing that, it's all of it sows seeds of doubt, and that's where you have to be able to protect that center of gravity or organizationally. Uh,
Yeah. So it's understanding and identifying what your center of gravity is. If you lost this, your business would go under. And how do you protect that? And that's a conversation, Jody, that, what is my center of gravity? Is it my podcast? Is it something, is it my relationships? Is it my ability to my strategy? But whatever it is, cannot be defeated. It's like what kryptonite could take that center of gravity out. And
and
if
and
that
that's a good point, Neil, because you just listed off several things, right? Clausewitz argues that there's only one center of gravity. So there's one thing inside of us as people or our organizations or our nationality. There's only one thing that if you were able to remove it, would cripple or defeat that entity. And it is very important to know yours to protect it, but you can also figure out your adversary. You can figure out your competition's center of gravity, and be able, if you can eliminate that, then you can eliminate, your adversary, whether it's on a battlefield or any other place of engagement. So, there's a really good lesson in that and understanding that the center of gravity is important. Um, and it does help you because it gives you some areas to think about as far as how to advance your mission or slow down your adversary's mission.
100%. Well, this is some great stuff, Jody. People can go ahead and check you out in two different ways, right? I mean,
Yes.
multiple ways, but go to your website first, right?
Yes, go to the website sls.consulting, and then also on the YouTube channel, and then any of the streaming, Spotify or Apple. You can see any of these podcasts there.
All right. We appreciate it, Jody. Great stuff. All right. That was a special Tramelcast, the Neil Haley Show, the Storehouse Media Group podcast, and Jesus and Ugly Jody, guys. Take care.